Integration Services is Microsoft's tool for ETL, which stands for Extract, Transform, and Load. Even if you don't know it by that name, you've probably performed these kind of processes quite frequently if you work with databases at all. So extract refers to pulling data from a source. Integration Services provides various drivers and configurations for many kinds of data sources, so almost no matter where your data is stored, you can get at it using Integration Services. So you're going to work with data sources, data source views, and connection managers in order to connect to those data sources and pull data in various ways. And you have a lot of flexibility in how you can configure that in order to pull in data into your package, which ultimately then goes into your destination database. What's interesting here is that a typical package is likely to pull data from multiple data sources, and you have the flexibility to do that. You can pull it from a database, from an Excel spreadsheet, from various other places. And we'll be talking more about that a little bit later. And then transform refers to manipulating the data along the way as it moves from the source to the data. With Integration Services, you can modify your data in very flexible ways. The transformation can be as simple as copying columns from one table to another as the data moves from point A to point B, or it can be more involved, including removing duplicates, substituting values from lookup tables, or changing the casing of strings, as well as other forms of data cleansing. Control flow tasks and data flow transformations are the components that you'll use to work with the data as it moves from source to destination. And then load refers to inserting the data into some destination. As with the extraction, Integration Services supports a wide variety of destinations, so you can output those to Excel spreadsheets, databases, flat files, almost anywhere that you want to put that data. Now, although you can use Integration Services to help you load data from external sources into a relational store, into a data warehouse, or into an analysis services cube, you don't have to use it for that purpose. You can move data to virtually any kind of a data store. Probably the original motivation for Integration Services at Microsoft was to support data warehouses and analysis services, but it has a lot more utility than just that. An Integration Services solution consists of one or more packages. A typical Integration Services package consists of several components: a control flow, some number of data flows, although those are optional, connection managers, and configuration elements. And each of these components is critical to the overall package. The one component that you'll always have is a control flow. A control flow is the building block of a package. It contains the procedural logic that dictates the flow of execution through a package. A control flow may consist of one or more other elements. It may have containers. Containers let you build a package in units, and they allow looping and sequential operations, as well as making it easier to group related tasks together in a complex control flow. Tasks are the discrete steps that the package follows from source to destination. And in this course, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the tasks that are available for you to build your control flows with. And then precedence constraints determine the order of the operation through the control flow. That you first have to perform this task, then that task, then this other task in a particular order with different conditions that determine which tasks execute and which alternate flows occur based on the data and based on different tests that you can perform. Then you have a data flow. A data flow is actually a control flow task, but a very specialized one. It invokes the runtime data engine that provides really the core ETL functionality that moves and processes data. You're likely to have multiple data flow tasks in any non-trivial package. And then connection managers represent the data sources and the destinations that the package uses. So anytime you read data from a data source or write it to a data destination, you'll be working with a connection manager either directly or indirectly. And connection managers support things like column mappings so that you can map the data flow to the fields within a data destination as one example. It also works with data types as well as lets you preview the data so that you can visualize it as it's moving through the overall control flow. You can build very simple packages that read data from one source and copy it to another, an almost overly trivial use of integration services. But as you learn more and more about the features of integration services, you can create some incredibly complex, mind-numbingly complex packages that perform all kinds of different kinds of actions on the data and can send emails and upload and download files from an FTP server, execute SQL, just do all different kinds of tasks. So you're likely to create more and more complex solutions with dozens of packages that you can also modularize in order to break down these complex operations in order to create solutions that are more maintainable and even more understandable. So the overall solution that you create may take a while to run, but integration services can handle it all, automating most of the steps while letting you write code to handle weird or custom kind of cases. And a large part of learning integration services is learning what features it already has built into it so that you don't have to create custom tasks and custom operations. Integration services provides a lot of tools that you can use as a developer of packages. Here I'm going to talk very briefly about some of them, and during the course we'll be exploring most of these in some detail. The Import and Export Wizard is a real easy entry point into integration services. It lets you quickly build a package. So you can create very basic packages with this tool, even if you intend to further refine the package. So as you're going to see shortly, you can use the wizard, create a package, and then enhance the package if you want to, or just run it as is. But while you're learning integration services, the wizard is a great way to explore its various features. Another tool that you'll very quickly become intimately familiar with is the Business Intelligence Development Studio, or BIDS, and I'll generally refer to it as BIDS throughout this course. This is the main development environment for integration services packages. It provides a full set of graphical tools for designing, testing, and deploying these packages. It's built using Visual Studio with additional project templates that support both integration services projects as well as the various components that you can add to a package and a solution. The nice thing about BIDS is that it's the main development tool for all of Microsoft's business intelligence tools. So you can develop integration services packages right next to reporting services projects as well as analysis services. And in fact, you can have them all contained within a single solution. Now, one thing to note about BIDS is that it's an optional installation feature when you install SQL Server 2008. If you only have SQL Server 2008 installed on your development machine, you'll have a limited version of Visual Studio. It's actually based on the Visual Studio 2008 interface. But if you also have Visual Studio 2008 Professional Edition or some of the other Team System editions, then when you load BIDS, you're actually going to be starting the full version of Visual Studio, but you'll have access to all of the integration services, templates, and so forth. And in this course, I'm actually going to be using the Visual Studio interface because we're going to need Visual Studio in order to develop some other support components. Another tool that you use is good old SQL Server Management Studio. This is the main tool that both DBAs and developers use in order to work with databases and server instances. In integration services, you can use it in order to manage packages that you have stored within the database. And it also provides an entry point to the Import and Export Wizard, and then various other tools for managing and executing packages stored within SQL Server. You'll also need Notepad or some other text editor. This is useful for editing packages. Integration services packages are stored as regular XML files with a .dtsx file extension. And so you can use Notepad to inspect and make minor changes to those packages. This isn't something that you're going to need to use all the time, but it's helpful to explore the features of packages as well as make small tweaks that might be a little bit difficult to make using BIDs. You have various options for how you store integration services packages. There are really two main options. You can store them either in the file system as files or inside a system database, but there's some variations on that. When you use the file system, you store the package as a .dtsx file, and that's an XML file. And you can do that either locally or on the network. Then, if you store them within SQL Server, you're storing them within the MSDB database, in a system table, or within the package store. Now this is where it gets a little bit weird. The package store is actually saving them out to the file system in a specific location, but they're managed by SQL Server. So the package store is sort of a hybrid between these two alternatives. In this course, we're mostly going to be using the file system, because that's how BIDs works with packages. When you create a new project, it creates a package that is stored in the local file system. Then, once you're done developing the package, then you can deploy it in various ways, either out to the different place in the file system or within SQL Server. So because we're going to be using BIDs a lot in this course, we'll mostly use the file system. So now let's take a look at some of these tools, and in particular, the Import and Export Wizard. What I'm going to do now is use the Import and Export Wizard to build a simple integration services package to extract some rows from a table in the AdventureWorks database, the sample database that you can install to play with various kinds of data. And then we're going to take that data and write it out to a text file. And the wizard's going to step us through the three main steps in setting up a package: defining a data source, performing a basic column mapping transformation, and then choosing a data destination. So let's get started. There's various ways to start the Import and Export Wizard, but in this case, I'm going to do it from the Start menu and Programs, go into SQL Server 2008, and select Import and Export Data. I happen to be running the 32-bit version of SQL Server on this machine, so that's the version of the Import and Export Wizard that I'm going to use. As with most Microsoft wizards, I get this nice welcome screen. So I'll click past that. The next page in the wizard is choosing a data source. As you saw, it took a couple seconds for the wizard to go out and get a list of all of the available data sources on this machine. As you can see, it assumes that we're going to extract data from SQL Server. And that's fine in this particular case, but you can make various other selections as well. I'm going to select the server. In this case, I'm going to use the local machine. And I'm logged in as a DBA or an administrator on this local machine for that instance of SQL Server, so I'll use Windows Authentication. But if I need to use a SQL Server login, I can select this radio button and enter my username and password. And in this case, I want to use the AdventureWorks database. I'll select that here from this list, and then I'll click on the Next button. The next page in the wizard is an almost identical version of the previous page, but in this case we're going to choose the destination. Where do we want this data to end up? In this case, I want to write it out to a flat file, so I'm going to select the flat file destination. That's right there. And notice that it repaints the page because it needs to get different input from me in order to identify the location in the file name where I want to write this data. I'll click on the Browse button, and I'll go to the C drive, and I've got this demos directory there. So I'm going to go ahead and save it there. And I'm going to name the file products.txt. And I'll click on Open, and that populates the file name text box, and then gives me some options for locale and code page. I'm going to leave those to the defaults. I can also specify the format. I'm going to use delimited, but I can also use a fixed width and ragged right format of text file. I don't need a text qualifier, but I do want to include the column names in the first data row. So you can already start to see that the wizard provides various options for configuring both the source and the destination of the data. Now I have two options for how I extract the data. I can copy all of the data from one or more tables or views, or I can write a query to specify the data to transfer. That's really handy if I want to create some sort of complex join between multiple tables. But for this simple example, I'm just going to copy all of the data from a particular table, so I'll leave that default setting. Next, I need to tell the wizard where I want to get the data. So I'm going to come here, and I want to get it from the production.product table. That's one of the tables that is available in the AdventureWorks database. And then if I want to, I can specify the characters that delimit the destination file. So rows are going to be delimited with a carriage return line feed pair, and the column delimiter will be commas. And I can change those if I want. At this point, I can click the Preview button and take a look at the source data. And this returns a small number of rows from the table so that I can make sure that I'm getting the data that I want. Because I'm reading all of the data from a table, this is a little bit less useful. But if I were getting it from a join that I'm writing myself, I can use this in order to make sure that this is the data that I want, that I've included the fields that I want, and so forth. There's also this Edit Mappings button. This opens up a column mappings dialog box that lets me match the columns in the source data to the columns in the output data. Now in this particular case, the destination flat file is going to be created by default using the columns and the data types of the source data. But if I was putting this data into an existing table, or say into an existing Excel spreadsheet that already had a defined structure, I could match the columns in the source to the columns in the destination. I can change the names of the columns. For example, I can click here. I can select different options, but I can also change the name. So if I wanted to change that to product name, I could change that, and that becomes the name of the column in the output file. But in this particular case, I'm going to leave all the defaults. And click on Next to go to the next step of the wizard. Here I have options whether I want to run the package immediately when I complete the wizard, and whether I want to save the package. So I am going to run it immediately as soon as I finish creating the package, but I also want to save it. And I have the option of saving it to SQL Server or to the file system. I'm going to work with this package in bids, so I need to save it out to the file system. I can also select the package protection level, and I have various options here. And in this case, I'm not going to save sensitive data. But if I had any sensitive data, I could select various ways of encrypting that data. But with this selection, any sensitive data that would otherwise be embedded within the package just won't get written out. That has some security implications that we'll talk about when we get into integration services security. Now, because I opted to save the package, I get this page of the wizard. I'm just going to call this Products, and that becomes the name of that package. I'm going to change the location, though, of that, because I want to put that in that users directory, make it a little bit easier to find, or that demos directory. Okay, so it's going to write the package out to that location. And then I can also provide it a description. So I'm going to call this AdventureWorks Products Export. That's optional, but you can include a nice description so that you can identify what this package does. All right, that's everything I need to do for the wizard, and I get this summary screen, and it shows that it's going to copy rows from the product table to that text file, and it's going to save the package to the demos directory products.dtsx. So now I'll click on Finish, and it goes ahead and runs the package. And as you can see, it gives me various steps in the execution. Depending on my selections within the wizard, the list of actions is going to vary. So in fact, if I had not opted to save the package, this saving action would not have appeared. And as you can see, I get a green dot for all of the actions that executed successfully. This is just an informational step that it's starting the pre-execute, so that's an I. And then it copied everything successfully, and then I can see that all the actions completed successfully, but there's a little bit of additional information here. And I can click on that, and I can see that 504 rows were transferred. I happen to know that that's the complete set of rows within that table, so everything got copied over successfully. But here is where, if anything went wrong, you would get some sort of count up here in error and warning, and usually there's some message here indicating the problem, and there'd be some sort of red icon there to indicate that something didn't complete successfully. So you could click on the message here and then get information about what happened. All right, so everything executed successfully. So now I'm going to load up Windows Explorer and go to my computer and go to that directory. And I can see that the package was saved there, and I have this products file. I'll go ahead and open up that, and there you can see the data that was exported using that wizard. I just showed you one way to start the import and export wizard, but there's other ways as well. You can start it within bids. In that case, you right-click on the SSIS Packages folder in Solution Explorer and select SSIS Import and Export Wizard from the pop-up menu. The problem here is that it won't directly execute the package. This is a shortcut that allows you to use the wizard to create a new package, which is real handy from within bids, but you don't get the option to execute the package at the end of it. You can also directly run the dtswizard.exe file from either the Run or the Start search box within the Start menu. That runs it directly. This is analogous to how I started it by selecting it from the SQL Server 2008 folder, but you can run that executable directly as well. Or you can select it from the program list. And then you can also execute it from Management Studio by right-clicking on the name of the database in Object Explorer and then selecting Tasks Import Data or Tasks Export Data. The nice thing about that is that it will automatically populate either the source or the destination information because you've right-clicked on a database, and it assumes that you're going to use that as either the source or the destination based on whether you select import data or export data. So it saves you a few clicks within the wizard. So just keep in mind that the other options for starting the wizard other than bids give you that opportunity to execute the package when the wizard is completed.